I'm Duncan Hunter.
And I'm Duncan Hunter.
And this is the Duncan Hunter Show. Hey, folks, today's show is all about the United States border and about border security. And I'm joined by two of the most foremost experts on border security. That's my dad, Duncan Hunter, who ran for president on border security, was in Congress for almost 30 years on border security, and wrote the very first law that actually built and funded the border fence. I'm going to have him talk about that. And I'm also joined by Chris Harris, law enforcement for over 36 years. And for millions of Americans who watch Fox News or that live in San Diego, he was the voice of the Border Patrol. He knows everything that there is to know about the border. He really does, and then some. And he knows where the bodies are buried. But first, no matter how many Border Patrol you have and no matter how many fences you have, the law counts first. The law is what enables everybody to secure America's borders. Without the law, the Border Patrol can just say, well, there's no law to tell us to do that. You made them build the border fence. Let's start with that because it was a huge success.
Well, about 25 miles to the south of us is the San Diego-Mexico border. That is the border between San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico, and that 14 miles between the Pacific Ocean and where the coastal hills of California start was the #1 smuggling corridor in America. That is where most of the drugs and most of the people who were being smuggled came through at one time. So 1990, we had 300 drug trucks a month on average roaring across the border between Tijuana and San Diego, just across the open border, going through the sagebrush, loaded with narcotics. In a few places we had a fence that was with a couple strands of barbed wire, but they just roared over that. And so we decided to do something about it. And my great congressional staff discovered, went out and searched and found 79,000 pieces of steel landing mat. Now that's those steel planks, which you as a great Marine know, you knit those together and you can make a runway in the desert for military aircraft.
Anywhere in the world, yeah.
They're 10 feet long, they're about ½ an inch thick, they're a couple feet wide. If you put steel posts in the ground and you weld those planks to those posts, you build a fence. And so I got in touch with Dick Cheney, was then vice president. He got us some welders, some Army welders who were reservists. And so they would come down on their training rotations and weld up that border fence. So we fenced that area.
That means it was free then because they were doing that to train, right?
Yeah, they did it to train. They did it with DOD money.
Genius.
And they loved it. They felt they were doing something good for America. They were stopping the drug trucks. When we got that 14 miles basically fenced, and a few guys, even one truck tried to ram its way through, didn't work, but we totally cut them off cold. So we stopped the 300 drug trucks a month that were coming through. Later, we said, let's stop the smugglers who are moving people also. So we put into law the triple fence. And that was in Newt Gingrich, then Speaker. The Republicans had won the House in 1994. We put in the law for the primary fence on the border, which is built out of the steel landing mat. Then a high-speed Border Patrol road that the Border Patrol could drive 50 miles on. Now this was the plan. Then another fence, another Border Patrol road, and then a third fence.
I like it.
The Clinton administration went nuts. They said, we ain't doing it. And Doris Meisner was then director of immigration. And we had a summit meeting in Senator John Kyle of Arizona's office. And she agreed because we'd put it in the law in a bill that the president had to sign. And it was now the law of the land that we were going to build a border fence. We agreed to build the first 2 layers of border fence, and we wouldn't have to build the third one if we didn't need it. We've never needed it. We started building that fence about 1990.
Didn't you say Hillary Clinton voted for that?
No, the Hillary Clinton voted for the next bill that actually called for 853 miles of double fence across the smuggling corridors of California, Arizona, and Texas. Hillary Clinton voted for that. I think Joe Biden voted for that. I'll have to check him. But I know Hillary did. So that first fence, that 14 miles of steel fence, stopped the drive-through drug pushers who were bringing loads of cocaine, marijuana, and other stuff across. The double fence, when we built it, the second fence, which we put up, was about 15 feet high with an overhang. So a smuggler had to come across the primary fence, cross the high-speed Border Patrol road, sit down with his welding gear and work on the second fence. That gave the Border Patrol time to come in and grab that guy because he's now between the fences. So here were the rough statistics that I got at the time. 1990, when we started that double fence, we apprehended about 205,000 people in that 14 miles between the Pacific Ocean and the coastal hills, the San Diego smuggling corridor. After we finished the fence, we had that down by 95%, the smuggling rate. And one great statistic for San Diego is by FBI statistic, and I'm not remembering the exact percentage, but we brought the crime level in San Diego down by about 51.6%. Wow. Because you had that big population going back and forth. But you needed one other thing besides the sticks and bricks and the steel and constructing this fence. You needed people, and you needed people who, in the Border Patrol, who would fight for this country, work for this country, man the fences, man all the areas that aren't fenced, the hundreds and hundreds of miles, and really put their heart into it. And there was one guy in California, in the San Diego area, and ultimately was viewed as a spokesman by millions of Americans for the Border Patrol that was really out there trying to secure the border. That's a guy named Chris Harris, and he's with us today, and he spanned both of our careers.
Yep.
So he had to listen to both of us. And Chris Harris epitomizes guys who go out there, take on the mission and do the job, and ultimately that results in fewer kids being hooked on drugs. That results in fewer people coming across and committing crimes, and there were a large criminal population that would move across the open border back and forth, commit crimes, and then recede back into Mexico when the heat was on. Because of Chris Harris and because of his leadership, and again, he represented the Border Patrol Union, but for most Americans, he represented the heart and soul of the Border Patrol. And I met lots of leaders in the Border Patrol who said, yeah, did you hear Chris Harris? He was right about this point, right about that point. We got Chris Harris today, so I'll shut up and let's introduce the great Chris Harris.
I think you just did.
So I want to just touch on something before I forget about it. When the first fence went up, it was the Badlands down there. It was out of control. It was a little before my time, but I talked to a lot of agents that worked it. What that did, Imperial Beach was, in San Diego, was the car theft capital of the United States. Imperial Beach was just out of control, a lot of crime. People were breaking into people's houses. People were afraid to leave their wives at home alone because they'd go back to the back shed and there's people in there. The crime rate dropped dramatically, as Duncan the Elder said. You now have $1 million houses in IB. You couldn't have that before. There's a big shopping center down there, Los Americas Outlet Mall.
It's a great outlet mall.
The developers had said, if the Border Patrol had not gained control of this area, we couldn't have built this. There's a huge housing development down there called Coral Gates.
There's Border Patrol there, right there, though. I mean, if
Literally.
you're at the mall, you can see Border Patrol on the hill behind the
Because there's no fence there.
Nike factory
There's
shop.
no
right?
fence there because that's where the Tijuana River comes in.
Right, yeah.
And we were going to put a fence there. We did engineering, but that stopped under this administration. So you have to have a Border Patrol agent there 24/7.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
right.
they'll just come pouring through into the mall. And shoppers, I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans, they don't really like shopping, having guys that are covered in mud and dirt and tatted up running through the store when they're in there. So that was remarkable. It didn't stop the foot traffic as much as we wanted because people could climb. It's about 8 foot tall. But, and I want to say this too, as a union guy, I used to tell people in Congress that I have the easiest union job in the world. What my guys really want is to be able to work harder. They want to go out and arrest bad guys. Let them do that. It's a fine group of men and women. Yeah. Large chunk of them are prior military. We got the law changed because we wanted to hire these guys who were getting out of the military after 20 years. And so they were like 38, 39, 40. The law said you can't join after 37. We got the law changed because we wanted these kind of guys that had served their country honorably and well. And when I say guys, I mean men and women. We have fantastic female agents. But we were able to do that. And I'll talk about morale in a minute that's non-existent. But to secure the border, you need three things to secure the border. And we know this. It's not in the past where we weren't sure it works. We saw it work. Under the last administration, in the last 2 years, we saw it work. The numbers were down to probably the lowest they ever were. You need
Under President Trump,
under President Trump.
the lowest numbers
In 2019,
people getting
2020,
across.
probably the best it was ever.
Well, hallelujah.
So we know it works. It's not like we don't know. So we can get back to it. That's the silver lining. We can get back to it. Because it's so out of control now, and I'll touch on that. But you need three things. You need technology. And we use sensors, and the bad guys know this. This is not an OPSEC thing. The bad guys know we use sensors. We have seismic and all kinds. We had an infrared camera at our station, the Imperial Beach Border Patrol station. When it broke down, we couldn't get parts for it because the company was out of business because it was a Vietnam-era thermal imaging camera. So you need good technology. You need infrastructure. And that's a fence. And we want a fence, not a wall, because we need to be able to see the bad guys.
But
on
remember,
stage.
when the wall went up, though, they were driving, like you said, this was before your time here, in San Diego, they were driving Mack trucks
Through the border.
with 20-foot containers full of drugs,
Yeah.
just driving 30 miles an hour with no one to stop them. So the fence did it, or the wall did exactly what it was intended
Yes,
to do.
it did. It stopped those
So let's
drive-throughs.
move on. Yeah, people get stuck on, they'll have a bigger ladder, it'll just push them, it's a balloon, they'll just move east. Well, good, let them move east. At least there's no Mack trucks driving through the border in San Diego.
And look,
Right.
I hear that all the time about the fencing. So that's why I'm saying you need multiple things to secure it. But what happened after January 6th? They put up fences around everything in D.C.
Yeah.
If they don't work, why bother? We have fences around Fort Knox. Now, they also have technology and they
No
have armed
president has
police.
ever taken down the fence around the White House.
No. So
Right.
they work to a point, okay? Rich people live in communities with walled communities, gated communities. There's a reason for that. So you need the infrastructure. We're getting better fences. We got much better fences. Some of them are 30 feet tall, okay? It's very difficult to climb. They can do it, but it's very difficult. And the whole idea is to slow them down. So get an agent there to make the apprehension. And that also means the roads, the infrastructure, and the stadium lighting and all that kind of
Electricity,
stuff.
you got to run electricity
all that.
way out in the middle of nowhere.
Camps, all that stuff. But the third you need is, and it's a trite saying, and you know this from being a Marine, and you know from serving, boots on the ground. We're supposed to have a statutory minimum that Congress sent. We're supposed to have almost 23,000, 22 and change. Border Patrol agents. We're down to 18 or thereabouts. So we're below, several thousand below the statutory minimum. That's for the whole
I'll
country.
say that again, Chris. How many are we supposed to have?
22 and change.
You're authorized
22,000.
23,000
Something like
agents.
that, yes. And that's written
When you
into
say
the law.
22 and change, you mean 22,000 Border Patrol
Right.
agents.
We have 18,000 and
And
change.
you got 18,000.
So we're 4,000 below with a statutory minimum.
Okay, so let me ask you a fast question.
Sure.
We were going to add under President Biden's bill that was passed as part of a bigger package, some 89,000. At least you provided enough money to have 89,000 new IRS
Yeah, I
agents.
know, it cracks me up.
So if we took 1/4 of those new IRS agents who are supposed to control us, not the border, you would be able to double the Border Patrol.
Yeah, and we never even expected. I mean, the union has always said we need about 25 or 26,000. We'd be very comfortable with that. But the 18 and change is not working. Our guys are getting burned out. They're bringing them down for the northern border, which leaves it more exposed. They're sending them down to the southern border. But I remember the project manager was showing us a video, and you showed 3 SUVs coming across the border in Texas where there was no
And you
fence.
just watched them.
And so he said, look, they panned in, you could see the bundles of narcotics in the back. And then he turns it off. And I said, but I actually know the rest of the story. And I said, here's the deal. I know what happened next. When they called it out, the response was NUA, no units available. I said, and I love the movie Casablanca. And so I said, this is my shocked face that what your $50 million drone did for us without the boots on the ground is it let me know that illegal narcotics are coming into this country. I'm shocked. So that's what your drone did, your technology, if you don't have the boots on the ground.
Like the French commander who said, "I'm shocked that gambling
Yes, that's
is
exactly
taking
what,
place here."
that's my reference.
Right.
So the $50 million drone let us know that illegal narcotics were coming into this country. So you need those 3 things on the border. Then we started having the caravans.
Technology, infrastructure, and boots on the
Manpower,
ground.
yes. And you need internal enforcement too, and that's basically ICE now, and they've been hobbled under this administration. Their apprehensions are way.
The executive branch has massive leeway in interpretation of the law, and they have massive leeway in execution of it too. So even though you have the fence and stuff, this administration has hobbled, the Border Patrol, INS, Customs. They're doing horrendous damage to it, right? And they're able to do that no matter what the law says. The Border Patrol's got to be there.
I'll talk about
but the
that.
executive branch can really screw with them.
So just to touch on that, Duncan, is that recently there's 3 different types of people coming here. You have refugees. We don't deal with that. That's a State Department thing. And God bless, these are people in a war zone. I got that. We have the regular immigration system, which is broken and needs to be fixed. And then you
Congress's
have
job, right?
That
That's
is
got to be done
Congress's job.
by
Yep.
Congress and
Yep.
Congress only. The
Yep.
executive can't do it.
And then you have asylum seekers. But now there's another little category called parole. And the way that's supposed to work is, at the time it was the Attorney General, now it's the Secretary of DHS, on a case-by-case basis. So say you have somebody in Mexico who needs a special type of surgery, it can only be done in, say, LA. He can be granted parole, and he's gonna come in, have the surgery, and then go back to Mexico. It says right in the law that it's a case-by-case basis. So what this administration has just done has just, in one fell swoop, it says, oh, people from Cuba get parole automatically, people from Venezuela get parole
So
automatically.
they're doing it by country.
By country.
So individual cases by the thousands.
By the tens of thousands.
Wow.
And so those numbers are not counting now.
So
they-
they're treating
the
them like
numbers went down.
everybody's got a heart problem.
Everybody
if you're
gets
from
parole.
Cuba.
Just from Cuba,
So
Venezuela, Colombia, and there's Nicaragua or something like that.
All really great countries and friends of the United States. This is
This is
not surprise
exactly
face.
right. But the big group is the people coming for asylum. And all they have to do is step foot on U.S. soil, and they say, I have a credible fear if I'm returned. Now, the law is pretty clear on that, too. And that was really meant against, like, genocide. I'll use an ex-girlfriend of mine. She was born in Cambodia. And her family swam over the river to Vietnam. One of her brothers drowned. They were dirt poor. They had a hut. She remembers growing up rice paddies. But if you remember 1980, it was the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, the killing fields.
They were killing people like
By the
crazy.
millions. So they get to Thailand. They live in a refugee camp for a year in Thailand. Then they get to the Philippines. They live there for a year. And then they're sponsored by a church in Oklahoma, and they're granted asylum. That's real asylum. Your government is committing genocide against you. Somehow it's gotten pushed out. And even Biden said the other day in a press conference, oh, economic reasons. That's not what asylum's for.
Chris, let me interrupt you for 1 second. I was with you on the border, and you had just interviewed a person who came across when they were given the lawyer's spiel that if you say these words, you will get welcomed by the Border Patrol, and they will administer to you as if you're seeking asylum. And you asked one of the people that claimed asylum, you said, tell me what political fear you have in your country. What's happened to you that's given you a credible fear for your safety? And he answered you, he said, the political parties are fighting. And you said, welcome to the Democrats and Republicans. That's not asylum.
So I've
But
had
they're
this
getting away with
issues. So I had a guy one time that I arrested. He was from El Salvador, and he claims MS-13's after me. And I said, you just 5 minutes ago in the interview, you said you were a dirt poor farmer. You're that important to MS-13? I said, you were in Mexico. Why didn't you stay there? You're safe. Oh, they would follow me. I said, where are you going? When we release you, where are you going? LA. And I just broke out laughing because that's where MS-13 started. Right. And then I had a guy from Guatemala who's a gangbanger, and he's claiming gang violence. And I said, where are you going? And he said, Oakland. And I said, I think people are leaving Oakland to go to Guatemala to get away from gang violence, dude. So they're given a script.
And you have an interesting take on this because you were a cop, a police officer in New York City under
North New
Giuliani.
York City.
Under Giuliani, right?
Well, he was the mayor at the time, yes.
But yeah, okay, so that counts. He's in your chain of command there at the top, right?
Well, I was a cop north of New York, but I
Okay.
did work on some task force. And anything that was good for New York City
But you're an
bled
actual
up to
cop,
us. Yes.
right? You're an actual cop. So when they're talking to you like you don't know which way's up or down, you're like, come on.
Yeah.
You know
Well,
all
I mean,
about
like if they're all tatted up, I would just ask them, who do you bang with? And they'll gladly tell you who they're affiliated, what gang they're with. For a while, they're on the border in Imperial Beach, our area of operations. Something like 60 or 70% of people we're catching were criminal aliens. They were tatted up, they had been deported, and they're coming back. You don't want that. People will say, Chris, there's a lot of Americans that are criminals. I'm like, yes, we grow enough ourselves. We don't have to import more. If I could, I'd send them all to, like, I don't know, Australia, like the British
system
did.
is so broken, though. I had a family here that I kept in the United States personally with a bill that wouldn't allow them to be sent out of the country. They were working at Moto World in San Diego, in El Cajon. Fantastic family. The oldest son was in college. The daughter was in high school in San Diego. And we tried and tried and tried, and some senator made it so I couldn't do that anymore. There was a new law passed, and they got deported after like being in the U.S. for 11 years or something. Yeah.
So the immigration system is kind of broken.
It is totally broken, not kind of about it. Yeah.
So the asylum system, though, the cartels learned how to game it. Like
Absolutely.
I said, depending what area of the world you're
Just
coming
like
from.
any corporation. They're making billions of dollars.
Yeah, no,
right?
That's exactly
They're going
right.
to play it.
I'll give one more example of people using the asylum system, misusing it. We catch a lot from China. And they always say, I'm a Christian and I'm being persecuted. Now, we know they do that. But I had a guy, and we use AT&T as a translator. They can provide, I mean, the government pays an ungodly amount of money, but they can provide any country, any language in the world. So I'm asking through this translator on the phone, on speakerphone, about this Chinese national, and he says he's Christian and he's being persecuted. I said, well, I'm a Christian. I'm not a good one. I need to work on it, but I know the tenets of my faith. And I said, so ask him about Jesus Christ. The answer he gave was he was a friend of Buddha's. Now, they lived several hundred years or 1,000 years apart, so I don't think JC and Buddha were cracking beers together, which means he doesn't know about Christian faith at all. I mean, he's lying. The asylum is bogus. So what happened, though, is around 2018, the bad guys really learned how to take advantage of the asylum. Before that, we'd have maybe 30,000 people a year coming in to claim asylum. Well, they set up the caravans. And we had found out through intelligence that some of those first caravans were kind of put together and sponsored by and everything, Venezuelan intelligence, which that means Cuban intelligence. That means Russian intelligence. Anything foreign nation states that don't like us can do to unravel the fabric of the society, they'll do. China, Russia, whatever. So sending in people that are criminals, sending in all kinds of people, fentanyl, it does that. So, but these caravans, they were all claiming asylum. So what President Trump did is he spoke to the union, Brandon Judd and others who run the union, National Border Patrol Council, and we were the first union that endorsed him. What they said was, we got to do something about the amnesty. It's out of control. And he listened. And he did something to this day, I can't believe happened. We never thought it would happen. He made a deal with the president of Mexico, who's a socialist. And it's known as the Remain in Mexico thing, but it's actually migrant protection protocols. And I'm sure there was carrot and stick. I understand tariffs and things were brought up and so on and so on, but he agreed to it. They used to not take people back at all if they thought they were.
Now explain what that meant after President Trump made that deal. What would you have to do then if you're going to claim asylum as opposed to before?
So you would be removed back to Mexico because that's the last country you're in and you're safe. If you're telling me you're from Nepal and bad things are happening in Nepal, well, you're in Mexico now. And you're going to wait there in line, which is very American. It's fair.
Do they know that Mexico is more dangerous than most of the countries they're coming from?
But the program was they would remain in Mexico, and they would wait in line. They'd sign up with the consulate or whatever, and they'd wait their turn for a hearing, an asylum hearing, in front of an asylum official. And then we would make the determination, yes, you get asylum, or no, you don't. The numbers dropped dramatically, like 90% the numbers dropped by, because they don't want to wait in Mexico.
They want to wait in the U.S. and just disappear to L.A.?
And, well, the GAO did a study several years ago. I had it. I don't know if I can find it now, but they did a study, and they showed almost 90% won't show up for their hearings. Now, the left will tell you, oh, 90% get status, asylum status. Like, so it's real stuff that's going on. No, that's the 90% out of the 10% that show up. And if you have a real case, you likely are going to show up because you know I've got a real case. Look at the scars on my back from being tortured. 90% of them will get it, but 90% of the whole group won't show up. We're not even giving them notices to appear anymore. We're so overwhelmed. We're just releasing them and saying, call back in a couple of years, please. And we'll try to set something up. Hundreds of thousands now are coming in.
See, this leads into, you're going to have some massive law passed. It's going to be doomsday scenario where everybody's legalized. That's what this is coming to. They're going to have to, because you're going to have tens of millions of illegal aliens in the country.
Well, we think it's probably about 25 million.
What do you do then? It's going to be like marijuana. When marijuana is legal for everybody in more than half of the states, the feds have to respond to that. They're going to have to legalize it federally. They're going to have to.
Probably.
This is going to be the same thing. Once you get an overwhelming amount of people where you got to bring them into the system, otherwise you have a massive group of people that is outside the system.
Like in France.
That's too bad, yeah. And they're doing horrible. I mean, they're not bringing any. They are the most spread out, compartmentalized groups in France, and they're having some troubles. They're having burning streets.
So that leads us to this question. The administration can't be that stupid that they don't realize what's happening, and when they have a hearing and 90% of the people don't show up, And incidentally, I've seen the same stilted surveys where some of the professors go back 20 or 30 years and say most of the people show up with the survey we did. Today, that I'd like to see one of the recent hearings and see the list of people who were supposed to show up and how many actually showed up.
And nothing happens if they don't.
But if they know, essentially they've opened the border.
Yes, for all intents and purposes, it's an open border.
Now here's what I think. The Democrats understand that. President Biden understands that. He's not an idiot, and his people that run their policy aren't idiots. They know that they're basically opening the border to millions of people.
Yeah.
They're losing, according to polls, the middle class of America politically. The middle class is leaving the Democrat Party. They are now backfilling. Some of their extreme policymakers figure that they can backfill the middle class, which is getting out of Dodge in terms of leaving the Democrat Party, with a group of people that they think will be much more manageable as voters at the polls. They can't ignore the 40,000 plus fentanyl deaths a year.
Oh, it's over 100,000.
Largely with people coming across the border. And so they understand that, and I think that Democrat policymakers, the extremists, view the damage that is being caused, the fentanyl deaths, the crime, all of the social burdens that we're going to have with people who are coming in with no visible means of support. I think they view that as collateral damage, and acceptable collateral damage to backfilling what they think will be a backfill, although I don't think they're right about this, but I think they feel that these people coming in will be much more manageable as Democrat voters.
Well, you give them free stuff and people are going to vote that way. I mean, that's people vote for free stuff. I want to disagree with you. I've gotten to the point though that it's I've gotten to the point now that I'll even take it a step further. I believe there's certain people in the background for ideological reasons that want to do harm deliberately, not just collateral damage, but want to do harm deliberately to the United States of America, that would like to see us a second world nation. I truly believe that now because of the things I've seen, and each time I feel like it's like you couldn't get worse, you do a worse thing, and you lie about it. The whole parole system, it's a lie. So I have to one up you. I believe that there's some people, I believe that a lot is that they, for whatever reason, votes or whatever, think they're going to get out of it. But I also think there's even more malfeasance involved, to the point where there are certain groups of people
There's a sinister
in the world
aspect, you're saying.
There is something that actually wants to do harm to the United States of America as a society.
In other words,
as a nation
they'd like to see us as an addicted nation.
They'd like to see us just not be a first world nation,
They want to bring America down. Well, so I'll take you one-upped him, then it's money. Because what Wall Street hates are outliers, are things that can mess up the cogs in the system. Wall Street likes a nice system, and that goes for the world market too. And when you have countries like the United States, that's a shining city on a hill, that is a big deal. Everybody uses our dollar. They use the American currency. We rule the financial world. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of billionaires and Communist Party leaders who are billionaires in charge of their entire country's economic output, they don't like that. Right. So in the end, it's people that want to do harm, and I would say it has a lot to do with money too, because if you can bring America down, that means other countries can raise up a little bit.
China wants their currency to be the world currency.
Absolutely.
So China's no friend of ours. They're an enemy. And I will use that to segue in. Do you know how many Chinese that are claiming asylum?
I was just going to ask that. No.
It's like over 10,000. It's incredible. I have a picture from last summer. I was down at the border with a friend of mine, was retiring, and she took me down to one last tour for herself and brought me along. And that area you're talking about that's visible from Los Americas, the outlet mall, we drive up to it, and there's 2 agents there, and there's like 13 people sitting on the ground. From Mali, from Brazil, from Russia. So there's 2 women and a guy there from Russia. We're almost in a shooting war with Russia, okay? So This guy is crew-cutted, buffed out, well-dressed, military-aged man. The women were too. And he's going to be released ultimately for asylum. And I'm like, does the U.S. government never heard of Spetsnaz? Or it's not the KGB anymore, it's the RSV or whatever it's called, but the former KGB. And Putin's a former KGB officer. You don't think he's trying to send people, operatives here in case he needs to do something?
Absolutely.
And the Chinese too. So these are people we're releasing into the United States. China's a mortal enemy. Let's not kid ourselves. Russia is not a friend of ours. So, but we're releasing these people by the tens of thousands into the United States.
Incredible.
What could go wrong? So that's problematic. The asylum system is now, again, is out of control. It is being abused and thrown out of all shape of what Congress intended to be. But we do know it works. We need to go back to the migrant protection protocols. And you're right, there's going to be a tipping point. So they like to use the old trite figures of 11 million illegals. They've been using that figure for 20 years.
Right.
No more have come.
It hasn't gone on at all.
Yeah. So the Border Patrol will tell you by our matrix that we think there's probably close to 25 million. And that's not recent. So with this big surge now, millions in the last couple of years, millions have come in. There might be that tipping point where they all get legalized. But we do know how to fix it.
You can't have 5 times the amount of San Diego.
Right,
The
5 million people.
I mean,
Just come in.
You
2
can't
years.
have that.
Yeah.
And live in this country because they're going to have kids and you're going to have 100 million people.
And where's the environmentalists? I had this conversation with a group of students from Point Loma Nazarene, and they were open border advocates. And I said, I just want to look at it from a logistics standpoint. No moral values affixed to it. You want an open border. And at the time I said, there's about 7 billion, the UN will tell you there's about 7 billion people in the world. And the UN will also tell you there's about 4 billion of them that live in less than ideal circumstances, ranging from I can't find enough work, there's not enough jobs, to the water's bad, to there's a lot of crime.
Starvation.
They're actively starving me or killing me.
Right.
So it runs the gamut, but there's about 4 billion people. And so I said to this group of Point Loma, these students, I said, so I just want to ask you this. Let's say Congress passes and the president signs a bill that opens the border up. However you get here, you're welcomed with open arms and you're a U.S. citizen. Fly in, take a train, parachute,
Swim,
doesn't matter.
whatever.
Right. So
Right.
here's
And
the
you
deal.
get free services and free money.
You become an American.
Well, so I said, at the time, there's about 330 million people in the U.S. Let's just be conservative and say only 1/4 of that 4 billion decide to come here, 25%. That's 1 billion people. And they're going to do it sooner rather than later because they know laws can change. So they're going to get here while the getting's good. So I said, within a year, you have just gone from 330 million people to 1,330 million people. Most of these people will not speak English through no fault of their own. They won't understand our system of government or how things work here through no fault of their own. They won't have jobs through no fault of their own. They won't have anybody to assist them through no fault of their own. I said, so here's a list of national parks with Yellowstone at the top. Which ones do you want to start bulldozing? I mean bulldozing and building gigantic tent cities with highways going in and rail spurs and water treatment plants and all that because they'll die otherwise. So which national parks do you want to start bulldozing? And they looked at me, and to their credit, they were like, we didn't think of that. And I said, again, not making a moral value judgment on open borders or not. The fact remains that no nation state has ever survived if it can't control its borders. Look at the Roman Empire. But here, logistically, how do you do it? You just added 1 billion people. You think we're short of water now? We're short of electricity? There's too much garbage?
That's crazy.
So
And even if you added
open borders-
100 million people.
Well, there's another moral point on this thing, though, too,
Great point.
Chris, and that's this. The United States, in this last 100 years, has given a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and money to nations around the world, third world nations, to help raise them up. Mm-hmm. I think there's an admonition that we should give people when they say, hey, I want to leave Venezuela, or I want to leave Salvador. We lost a few Americans, KIA in Salvador. We gave lots of help, military help, to keep the Russians from imposing a government that they supported in El Salvador. Most nations, we saved Europe after World War II. We've done so much for third world nations. We've sent millions to the African continent. So helping those nations pull themselves up by their own bootstraps is something the Americans have done. Mm-hmm. We gave at the office. A lot of those people coming to the United States have an obligation to stay there and make something out of their own country.
I've heard that, and I agree with that.
And this asylum thing, you know, asylum was developed to save people who were escaping Nazi Germany.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It wasn't made to save
and then
people who were.
communism,
Yeah, and
It
a
was
few
genocide
places.
against your people.
Right.
Got it. We welcome you with open
come on
arms.
in.
So when they tell you they're coming because they're a friend of Jesus, and then you find out that they think Jesus was a friend of Buddha's, so they really aren't coming for that reason.
Right.
They're coming because they've been told by a lawyer or somebody down the line from a lawyer that that's the script that they're supposed to read to you
Yep.
when you meet them at the border. But this government is not doing anything.
No, we're
to
not even
change
questioning
that.
really anymore. It
If
just,
we went back to the Trump policy of stay in Mexico
Until you were
and
adjudicated.
apply, and let's see if you're real or not.
Yep.
When you say that I'm an asylum seeker, let's see if you're real. If we went back to that, would it work?
absolutely. We saw it before when the cartels learned how to game the system. We got President Trump to respond to that, and it worked. The numbers plummeted. And then day one, this administration undoes that with an executive order, and it went out of control again. And when you have a head of DHS, who we knew he was bad when he was head of CIS, their own inspector general report said he did things that he should not have been doing. The guy testified not long ago that he didn't know that the
What's
cartels.
his name, Chris?
Jesus, I don't know what this is. Mayorkas. So he testifies to Congress under oath that he had no idea of this tactic where they'll push a group, the cartels, the smuggling organization will push a group of like 500 across. They're all claiming amnesty. They're not trying to run. They're not trying to get away from us. They just cross and sit down. And we have to pull agents from miles and miles around to come and transport them to the station, process them. That area is now wide open. That's when the cartels push across high-value targets, people that are bad people or narcotics.
Okay, so you've
So
hit a-
he says he doesn't know anything about this. The chief of the patrol says, yeah, we told him. This has been going on for 2 years now. He knows. But
So
he
you-
testified.
So you've hit a really important point here. The point for the American people to understand is the asylum thing pulls tons of people off the line
Yep.
so they can process the people who claim asylum. So when 500 people come in and I'll say we claim asylum, you got to pull Border Patrol agents from big pieces of the border who were operating, who could stop people from coming in illegally or stop drug
That's a
runners.
tactic they use.
And you pull them into an office environment so they can process this group of asylum seekers. So it has the effect of opening the border.
It does, and let me use this to segue into something else, the morale. And you guys serving in the military understand morale is important. The morale is shot. So we have a mandatory retirement age of 57. Guys, agents, and bosses and the like would come to the union, can you get me a waiver to stay longer? They wanted to stay past 57. Now everybody's retiring as soon as they can. 50 years old. At 50, all you have to have is 20 years in. You retire. You're losing this institutional knowledge. These are senior people. They're doing this because they feel like now this administration is they are part of the smuggling organization. We're picking you up from the border. We're transporting you to the station. We're feeding you. We're washing you. Then we're moving you on to an NGO, it's a non-governmental organization, moving you further north. We have now, in fact, become part of the smuggling
They're
organization.
smuggling. That is sad and funny,
And
but more sad.
they are disgusted. These, again, are former military, a lot of them, or former cops like me, former law enforcement. This group of people that I served with, I served 5 different law enforcement agencies in 36 years. This group is some of the most that believe in the Constitution the most. They truly believe in it. They want to protect the United States. They want to protect the border. They want to protect the Constitution. They want to protect the people that live here in this country. And so now they're feeling like they're a part of the smuggling organization. They're part of the human trafficking. And that's all part and parcel of the same. It's not some boutique group that, I deal only with 13-year-old girls. It's the smuggling organizations. They feel like they're letting America down and they're leaving in droves. So they could say they want to hire a bunch more people, which would be great, and they could authorize the money for it, but there's a lot of people that won't, families now are telling that have been generations in the Border Patrol, and same thing's happening in the military, telling them their sons and daughters, don't join. And the morale, there is no morale. Because basically you're part of the smuggling organization, you're a glorified babysitter, your guys are getting sick with COVID. They were, because I don't care about masks or anything. They were in a packed room with 500 people, and then we don't. This administration does not keep track of these children. HHS takes them and gives them to someone who's a sponsor. We fought tooth and nail to get the ability to use a swab to do DNA testing, because we saw a lot of gypsies, the Roma, the Romani, and others we knew these weren't their kids. And I don't know why the Democrats fought against it. We weren't using it for enforcement purposes. There was no database. We just, yep, you're not related to that person you're claiming is a kid. And we did a trial, a test program. A horrendous percent that were not their family. I know a woman who worked at one of the shelters that's run by one of those NGO services. And she was horrified to see some guy come in who's in his 20s and say that 13-year-old girl is his daughter, but he doesn't know her name. And they'll release him.
Doesn't know her name and they release him.
That's human trafficking. HHS does it at an even bigger, grander level. There's tens of thousands of kids. We don't know where they went, who got them. So you want to talk about human trafficking?
So I can see why the agents would want to quit when they think that they're
retiring.
actually facilitating this process.
Look, it's not like TV. It's not easy to get into law enforcement generally. I mean, Hollywood will pretend you can have an 8th grade education, and no, generally you need a college degree and so on and so forth. But I never saw until recently, and talked to some agents who were resigning, not retiring, resigning because they didn't have enough time in. And I'm like, what agency you're going to? What police department? I'm done. I'm good with my hands. I'm going to do handyman work. I'm going to be a carpenter. I've never seen anybody that at least didn't have another law enforcement job lined up. And they're just so burnt out on Border Patrol and specific in law enforcement in general. They're just like, I'm done. So they're throwing away that career because they can't stand what's happening now. And this should not be, like, I tell people this should not be a bipartisan issue. It should be a nonpartisan issue.
Exactly. It used to be.
No, I worked with Democrats who said they understood securing the border. They were upset about the immigration system and it needed to be fixed, and they're right. But somehow in the last few years, it's flipped that the Democrats generally want this open border, do not want to secure it, don't mind that criminals are coming in. And
which is crazy because they live in the
Hillary
same
Clinton
areas
voted
that we
once.
live in.
well, not all of them.
But Democrats and Republicans live on the same streets that,
I get
that
it.
are seeing much bigger crime. And
Sometimes, and I differentiate between liberals and leftists. My stepmom is a liberal, wonderful woman, lover. She believes that human trafficking is a whole different thing than smuggling. And I'm like, it's all the same, man. If you want to stop it, you have to stop it at the border en masse. I think a lot don't understand what's happening at the border. I know with your dad that I had trouble getting the national press to be interested in the border. I had more international press. I've done Reuters, I've done BBC, I brought them on a border tour, Australian Broadcasting Corporation several times, Swedish, all over the world were interested, but I couldn't get like CNN or those people down to see what's happening. And they don't want to know it.
Fast story on that.
not their narrative.
You need to know this fast story about a San Diego media, KUSI, which is one of the rare independent news stations in America, was contacted by CNN. CNN said, we're doing a border story. We know you're the border guys. Will you shoot it for us? The leader at the KUSI, the executive at KUSI, said, sure, we'll shoot it for you. Incidentally, the fence works. At that point, the CNN representative said, we'll get back with you.
I know this story.
And they never did.
Yeah.
In fact, I think President Trump mentioned that, but the point is they don't like that story because
not
it
their
doesn't
narrative.
fit their story.
So I will tell you how that works too. You could even have somebody who's maybe a reporter who's kind of liberal, but they still want to tell the story. So several years ago, I was struck in the head by a rock from a smuggler. And I was out with traumatic brain injury and all that. And so CNN contacted the union that they had a guy wanted to do a documentary on rockings. And the union said, we got just a guy for you. He's a union official, so he can speak. And blah, blah, blah. And I was working light duty. So they came out and the documentarian said, I'm a liberal, but I want to do a fair story. He spent 2 days with me. Went down to where it happened, interviewed me. Then he goes, we're going to go to Mexico and get their side of the story. I'm like, I don't know what their side of the story could be, but okay, God bless. So he said it'll air in about 2 weeks out of LA, CNN LA. Cool. 2 weeks go by, I don't hear anything. 3 weeks go by, I don't hear anything. So I call the guy. And he says, Chris, I should have called you. I'm just so embarrassed. He said, my editor spiked the story. He said it was too pro-Border Patrol. It was just about a Border Patrol agent getting hit in the head with a rock. But somehow that was pro-Border Patrol.
Always wear a helmet by the border,
This is how they do that. They'll spike. So what did that guy learn too? If he wants to get his stuff on the air, it better slant a certain way. That's a story I was involved with. I know it for a fact because it happened to me. So
how big was the rock?
About the size of a softball.
And they threw it over the fence or what?
No,
What was
the
happening?
smoker on top of the fence and just threw it directly down.
So you were walking along the fence or what?
No, I was trying to handcuff a guy that was on
And he
our
threw
side.
a rock at you.
So no, there was a group of 4 people. I drove up to them. They hit the fence. They were right by the fence and started climbing over. I grabbed one guy, threw him on
Back
the
over
ground.
to Mexico.
Yeah,
Okay.
we call that TBSing, turning back south.
Okay.
So I got one guy in the ground. The other 3 or 4 get back into Mexico. One of them is a smuggler. He climbs back on top of the fence while I'm kneeling on this guy trying to hook him up and throws the rock directly in the top of my head. So anyway, the press doesn't like the story. They don't want to tell what's happening down there. We do get KUSI. You and I have worked with them many a time.
Not anymore. They just went corporate.
Yeah, they just got
Well,
sold
maybe,
out.
yeah, but I understand that the new leadership, that the company that bought KUSI in San Diego has got some conservative roots. So
Well, they
but-
did have
but-
me on recently. They did have me on
but
recently.
the good thing is it's not NBC, CBS, or ABC.
Look, I've worked with the local branches of NBC, CBS, and ABC, but the national level is really hard to get
But
them in.
if the local branches were to do a story that really touted the border fence, that would have to be cleared by New York,
yeah,
by
no,
NBC in
I-
New York,
I
or
got it.
CBS,
People that haven't
ABC.
come within a mile of the border.
Yeah.
Well,
in
look,
their entire lives.
They won't clear it because it's not the story.
They
just
want to
like
tell.
just
Yeah,
like
it's
the
not the
person
narrative.
that did the story on you, it's not the story they want. It doesn't fit their storyline.
Illegal aliens buy stuff too from corporations. It's like Michael Jordan said, Republicans buy shoes too. They buy Air Jordans too. Corporations are not going to have anything that hurts their bottom line, which is they don't check your legality when you're in Costco.
No, no.
or
I mean, the
you're
banks now are
buying
allowing
stuff
them to
from
have
McDonald's.
bank accounts.
You can have
legally.
bank accounts here.
We give
Yeah.
them drivers. I have to get a special driver's license now because our driver's license in California is crap. Everybody knows, the federal government knows it's crap because they just hand them out to anybody. My name is Joe, Juan Sanchez and here's my driver's license. Thank you. To fly on a plane now,
You have to have
get
a
special
passport, basically,
yes.
or a passport. So it's like being in a different country now.
I've worked with the New York Times before, believe it or not. And there's a guy that I think is okay, and he will call me for information, and then he'll quote me. He knows it's okay. He'll ask, "Can I quote you?" And he quotes me in the New York Times. I got in a disagreement with a woman one time, and I was telling her something, and she says, "I don't believe that." And I said, "Why? I lived it. This is what I did." And she says, "Well, that's not what the New York Times said." I said, "Literally, they don't come to the border. They will call me up from New York, and I'll tell them some things, and I'll call someone else up and get their opinion. I said, "But they're not at the border." She goes, "Yeah, but I'm going to believe them over you." And I said, "I don't know how to process that." Okay, I did this for almost 22 years, 21 plus years. I don't know what's going on, but this reporter who has not left Manhattan is writing a story and telling you what to think. So we have a problem with the American press, the American media. Our founding fathers were brilliant. They understood that you needed a pit bull press to keep things honest as a government. But if you're only going mostly after one side, or only telling one side of the story, that doesn't work. And that's what we're seeing, I think, with the American press, is they don't want to tell this
I
narrative.
think Elon Musk made a profound comment when they said, "Why are you buying Twitter?" He said, when you have an argument, and this is the legend of what he said, "I'd like to hear both sides." Yeah. We are not hearing both sides today in these major debates that
Look at
affect our
COVID.
country.
Yes. COVID, where the government was able to lean on the press, the free press, the online press, and make them take things that were true off and lie to the American people. There have been no repercussions for what happened during COVID, and thank God as humans we move on and we look to the future, because I would just get madder and madder just thinking about every single American being lied to for years, for multiple years, and now it's coming out that it was all lies, that there was government coercion on the free press, and we're just like, well, that was 3 years ago. Next.
So we have a short memory. So that just proves the point in general, and I try to stay in my wheelhouse. I have my own thoughts on COVID, and I'm sure they mesh with yours, but my wheelhouse is the border and how that works. And when I do speaking engagement, I tell people like that, you can ask me all kinds of questions about abortion stuff, but I'm not going to answer it because that's not my wheelhouse.
Smart, by the way.
I want you to understand, I want you to believe that I know what I'm talking about. So the American press, for whatever reason, has gotten to a point where it will self-censor itself. It wants to tell the narrative it wants to tell. I would love to be able to take people down to the border more often. I still bring some people down there, not my border tours, I can't do that anymore, but I bring them and show them some things, and I talk to them. The same thing with speaking engagements. I did one many years ago, 2016, before the election, and I won't say the name of it, but it was a synagogue. And I'd done a speaking engagement for a local Lions club. And one of the members came up to me later on and said, I'm a judge, I'd like you to speak to my group. I said, oh, a group of judges, cool. And he goes, well, I'm Jewish. And so I go, I bring my yarmulke. I'm from New York, I have a yarmulke. I mean, we have the Jewish holidays, And he says, oh, well, we're Reformed, we don't wear a yarmulke. But anyway, I speak to this group. And they are left of center, not a lot, but they're certainly not conservatives. And I speak to them. And afterward, and I said, I'm not telling you to vote for anybody. I'm not even telling you to really listen to me. Just start using my stuff and ask questions yourself. So this guy comes up to me, an elderly Jewish guy, and he says, I'm going to vote for Trump. I said, I'm not telling you who to vote for. And he says, here's the problem. He says, we remember this ship that came here in 1938. And I said, I know exactly what you're talking about. It was an ocean liner that came from Germany with Jewish refugees. And we turned them away. I think it was Miami. They were turned away by the U.S. government, which was under a Democrat. And they were sent back to Germany. And after the war, they did a study, and all but like 3 of them, and there was thousands on the ship, died at Auschwitz. He says, we remember that. We want to welcome immigrants. I said, that's fine.
But that's what asylum is for.
That's what asylum is for. And he says, on the other hand, I have family in France. And he says, when the kids walk down certain streets, they're not bullied, they're beaten. And he says, I don't want to see this turn into that. So my point is that I just talk to people and tell them what I know. This is my personal experiences. Do what you will, but you do have the right to hear all sides of the story. And the American public has the right to know what's going on the border right now and how broken it is and how dangerous it is.
So Chris, if a group wants to hear from you, could you speak all over the country?
Well, most of California.
If they pay you enough.
I will go anywhere in the country if they pay me enough.
But the best way to contact you is through your email,
Yes.
cookandcop, which is C-O-O-K, just like a cook, N-I-N, cop, cookandcop, at AOL.com.
I'm old school.
If they
AOL.
contact you there.
I'm old school.
If everybody, I don't think anybody listening will remember AOL.
Well, Chris will.
I've got a Yahoo address.
So I think that's the most interesting thing, that if you're a group of Americans who want to know one of the primary issues in this country that will affect us for the next 100 years, they ought to be listening to you, because you've got real facts, a real story, and a real insight.
Keep up on things. There's still bosses that call me. The thing is, people don't even see some of the secondary effects. When we would arrest somebody that was here illegally, not just jumping the fence, but was already here, and we ran records checks on them, their rap sheet. What you saw, a lot of these people, a lot of these guys, were multiple DUIs, and multiple domestic violence, and they hadn't been removed. And I always wondered, where is Mothers Against Drunk Drivers on this? Because we have a friend who's an angel mom. She lost her son to an illegal alien who was a drunk driver. It happens a lot. And right there, that can affect you and your family forever. And people don't seem to grasp this. California is a sanctuary state by law now. We used to have pangas that come in Mexican fishing vessels, and they were landing. And this is how much juice Coronado has. Some people in Coronado made a call to DC, and the word came down to us, you will stop all pangas from landing in Coronado. We had specialized units and all that. Became so good at it that they had to go out 200 miles to a mothership to refuel anything. And they were landing up in Monterey and Big Sur. And the CHP at the time could work with us, and we paid them money, and they called it panga patrols. That's where some dangerous people are coming in. But the other thing is that this happened this last year. There was a guy here illegally, beat up his wife, or I think it was girlfriend, does time in the county jail. He gets released. They cannot notify ICE or Border Patrol. They know he's illegal, but they can't notify us, so we don't know.
It's illegal to notify ICE and Border Patrol about the illegal.
Right. So, because we used to put detainers on him. What happens is, the guy gets out of jail. He has to stay away from his wife. He gets to see his kids at a church with one of the church officials who's a monitor. So he goes in there, and you might recall this, it happened not too long ago. He goes in and shoots and murders both of his kids, the monitor and then himself. And the sheriff was pissed. The sheriff said, my hands are tied. I could not let ICE know, but if I was able to, he would be in federal custody, facing deportation. But now he was released, and he killed 3 innocent people.
The immigration system is broken. And two, if you don't become an American citizen and you don't go through, it is a long time.
Yeah, my wife went through the process. She's in Mexico.
Years. My girlfriend went through it too. It took about 10 years, right? If you don't pledge your allegiance to the United States, and learn the history and realize what it stands for, why would you obey the laws? You don't give a damn about the laws. You can go drunk drive, domestic violence, like you said, and much, much, much worse because you treat American streets like you treated the streets from Ecuador, from Panama, from Colombia, from Mexico. You think you're back there. You don't realize you are in the shining city on the hill because no one made you realize that. Because we allowed you to come in without checking anything and making you swear allegiance to anything or anybody, be it the Constitution or the flag, or at least to respect American laws.
A friend of mine, and he's not a Border Patrol agent, but he's a former Ranger. Was in the
Army
75th.
Ranger?
Yeah, Army Ranger.
We have one of those sitting here too.
Charlie
Rangers.
Never
What
went
were
to
you?
Ranger school, but I was
You
in
went to
Charlie
Airborne
Rangers.
School. You're in Charlie Rangers.
That's true.
In what regiment?
Yeah.
The 70
The
what?
75th.
C Company, 75th Rangers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I read a book
in
about
Vietnam.
them. Yeah, no, I read a book
I
about
just
them.
showed
Army
up.
strong.
So
Be all you
he
can
was an
be.
officer, and he got out, and he became an engineer. But he found into law, it was duly passed by Congress and signed into law, that, and it specifically basically says, even if you're illegal, you're supposed to sign up for the selective service. You're supposed to sign up for it. It's a felony not to. Okay, you tell me if any of these people that are coming here illegally are signing up for the selective service. And if they're not, they're committing a felony, and they're not willing to serve this country. And the other thing is, I'm going to use another example. This happened at our sister station, Chula Vista Station. They had arrested a guy from El Salvador. And our guys are really good at doing interviews. Now, the left will tell you, leftists who have their own agenda, that, oh, we do all these background checks. And we do. But they're almost worthless. Because unless we have connectivity to that country's database, or that country doesn't even have a database. Now, I'm sure China has a great database on everybody in their country, but they're not sharing it with us.
Right.
So we got this guy from El Salvador. They do the interviews with them. They do the records checks. It comes back 1040, negative derogatory. Nothing bad showing up. But that's really only for the United States. So they're going to release him. And on the way out, he says something about, boy, I thought those 5 murders or 5 homicides in El Salvador would be a problem. No, come back, let's chat some more. They check through the El Salvadoran consulate, 5 homicides in El Salvador. This guy was going to walk out the door. Records checks are not the end all and be all. So don't anybody ever tell you that. Right. That's not true. So we have crime going up. We have homelessness going up. Look at the environment. Nobody wants to talk about that. I worked on environmental issues. You know that with the sewage coming across the chemicals. I couldn't get Sierra Club interested.
We have massive sewer coming
And
across
chemicals.
from Mexico and chemicals into San Diego. I mean, there's stories about Border Patrolmen's boots being
I have pictures
melted.
of them. Yeah, I
right?
have pictures of them.
Yeah, but people turn the other way because it's happening on the border here.
I
It's ridiculous.
would hear from some people on the left that are environmentalists, oh, but it's Mexico. And I'm like, do you know how patronizing that is?
And
They're
they
grown
also,
adults.
They also want us to pay for their water treatment facilities.
we treat one of
in
their
the
sewage.
hundreds of millions of dollars to redo their plants, so they don't dump sewage that make the beaches in California
Imperial Beach?
unusable.
Closed for
You're
weeks
not allowed
on
to go
end,
in the
months on
water.
end. Yep.
Thank you, Mexico.
There's an environmental impact too.
Massive. Yeah.
You see the trash everywhere. Okay. Nobody on the left wants to speak about that environmentally, but by massive illegal immigration, you have and asylum system gaming. You have environmental issues. You have like the crime I said. You have we're going to have to pay for a lot of programs.
Massive homelessness in San Diego. You have massive money
So-
going towards people that can't afford to live on their own.
It negatively impacts us in many, many ways. I know they like to do the shots of the mother and daughter or the kids, and oh, this is what's coming across. Yeah, that's happening. But also you have to see all these military-aged men, young men, groups of them, 10, 20, all men. And you have to wonder, like, why? Why are they all coming here? And you brought up an interesting point before. Mexico has never wanted to stop the flow of illegals from their country into our country because it's like a tea kettle. We are the release valve.
Exactly.
There would have been a bloody revolution in Mexico years ago if they couldn't get rid of their malcontents, the people that are unhappy, that are angry, that don't want to be there. We are the emergency steam release valve from Mexico.
And how much money is being sent back from the U.S. to
The
Mexico?
remittances
is massive.
And again, that negatively impacts our economy because that's all money that's gone from our.
But helps the Mexican economy or wherever the people
El
are coming
Salvador,
from.
wherever
Yeah.
they're sending it back to. Yes, that's American greenbacks down in that country.
Here's $10. You can now live for 1 month.
And I just wish more people would say it's a nonpartisan issue. Let's go back to securing the border.
So, Chris, what is the first thing you would do with a new administration that wants to secure the border?
Well, as emperor, so I would.
And would you put the Trump order back into place?
I would absolutely meet with the president of Mexico and say, here's some goodies for you, and here's some of the negatives. We're going back to that program. You signed off on it once, you can sign off on it again.
And again, that program is?
The migrant protection protocols, the remain in Mexico policy.
They have to remain in Mexico and apply in Mexico.
Until they have a hearing.
And if they aren't genuine asylum seekers, they don't get in.
Right.
And you said that only about 10% turned out to be genuine asylum seekers.
So no, only about 10% show up for their hearings.
Here in the U.S.
No, I mean in Mexico.
Oh, so I don't even remember what the numbers were, but it just plummeted dramatically. People just stopped coming.
Because they have to wait in Mexico.
Because they have to wait in Mexico.
Right.
And they didn't want to do that. So obviously they went back to their countries because it wasn't really what they're claiming. I mean, I've had people on the border where I've said they're claiming asylum, but to me they're like, oh, I'm looking for work. Which is, I'm God bless you when I get a job, but the fact is that's not asylum. Now when they get back to the station and they're really questioned, they're going to go back on their script and say, gang violence or this or that or that kind of stuff, or I'm Christian, I'm from China, I'm being persecuted. That's one of the first things I would do. I would meet with the president of Mexico, and I would go back to where we were on that. I would try to get Congress to pass it into law. I would go to finishing the infrastructure. There's still parts down in IB that we need to put some stuff up. By the way, those companies we had contracts with, the U.S. government had contracts. We broke those contracts when we said we're not doing it anymore. We had to pay a lot of penalties. And that's not what the U.S. government should be doing, violating contracts.
You just said something important, though. Congress needs to pass a law. And again, I'm scared that they are, because right now, whoever's president can change the executive order and
at a whim
and change it, right? So it matters who's president, obviously. But if we want to make it about security and make it nonpartisan, like you say, then it needs to be made into law. So it's period, no matter who the president is, they can't change it one way or the other. The problem is, though, that's what I'm scared of, is the big immigration bill, where we say, hey, we're going to finally secure the border if you legalize 100 million people.
They're already talking that way. They're already talking about, oh, we need to legalize these people. We need to bring them into the system. Well, then they get to vote, too.
The code for that is a comprehensive immigration reform, which means
we're almost there.
Massive legalization of
and we've done it in the
people
past.
come in
even
illegally.
Ronald Reagan did it. But the fact is that they've been promising, we'll do this, we'll provide them citizenship or whatever, and then we'll secure the border. What most people are saying, secure the border first, and then we can move on to this problem and see what we're going to do about it. What I would do as president, or what I advise the president, would be the parole system has to be revoked again, going back to what it's supposed to be, one-on-one special cases, not by country. Finish the infrastructure. Try to hire Border Patrol agents back. Let ICE do their job. I would find ways to de-incentivize sanctuary states, because it's horrible for us. The cops know it. It's not good. I would work on getting the immigration system streamlined, the actual immigration system. And I would just let the men and women of the Border Patrol do their job, which is what they want to do. But if you do those several things, and you start prosecuting people, you need U.S. attorneys too, because you have a lot of U.S. attorneys who do not want to process or prosecute immigration crimes.
That's not glamorous. It's not what you see on TV.
No. I mean, I'm going to tell one other story. I went to the cop's funeral. He was an Oceanside police officer. It happened many years ago. A gangbanger shot and killed him. The Oceanside chief of police blamed the Border Patrol. Now, I understand he was distraught when one of his men was killed. And he said, we let him go. Here's what happened. He was a prior deportation. We caught him coming back in. We did a paper case on him, 8 U.S.C. 1326, reentry after deportation. It's a felony, and I've done a lot of them, and you have to call up prosecutions. They call up the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then they call you back and say prosecution declined, and you type that at the bottom of the report. So what we did was then we did a voluntary return for him back to Mexico. And then he crossed again, and we didn't catch him that time, and then he went and killed the cop. That wasn't the Border Patrol's fault. That was the U.S. Attorney's Office fault. Prosecution declined. I can't prosecute the guy. I can't put him in a federal prison. They can. So you have to work on that. You have to make sure that the U.S. attorneys are on board. You need an attorney general that lets them know that this is part of your job, is to prosecute, especially these felonies. The 1324, 8 U.S.C. 1324, which is smuggling, 8 U.S.C. 1326. You've been for a judge. He's deported you, and now you're coming back. And those are the bad guys. These are the gangbangers. I mean, I'd see them, and they'd be bare-chested with their tats, and half the time was gun out and get on the ground, because these are bad people. And so there's a lot of things we can do, but there's the ones I articulated or enumerated. If you do that, we can secure the border.
So everybody listening, don't be too depressed. This is why we have faith in God and not man. And you've been listening to the Duncan Hunter Show. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dad.
Hey.
And please stay tuned for our next shows. It's going to be interesting.